Well, Melbourne City are still top of the A-League women table, despite only having a draw against Western United, a side that Melbourne City have yet to beat in the short history that Western United have been in the A-League women competition. Internationally, we now know a lot more about the Matildas coaching search than what we did last week, but it seemingly left more questions than answers. We also found out this week that you don't need to complete a game of football to walk away with 3 points, while Wellington Phoenix showed us that it's not over until it's over with a 98-minute Olympico. Elsewhere, back internationally, the Futsal Tillies have made the Asian Cup, and we'll take a look at their campaign as a whole and what's next for that side on this episode of the Dubcast, part of the Round Ball Australia podcast network. My name is Poletti and Burke. Once again, it's just the two of us.
Look, it could be worse. People could have no A-League women's podcasts to listen to.
This is true. This is very much true, and I think the world would be much sadder if there were no A-League women's podcasts to listen to. But others have come back this week. We're back as always, and just the two of us. But I think we've got this covered, just more than enough. We both watch enough women's football that we've got this covered. And as always, we'll start with our big storyline of the week. So, Burke, as always, you get to go first. Have your pick of the board.
My big storyline is probably the choice that the APL have made to not reschedule the Sydney versus Canberra game. Midweek game that got rained out horrifically, has not been slated for being rescheduled and is instead going to be awarded to Sydney as a win after they were leading 2-0 in, I think, the 54th minute when they cut the game off.
Yeah, your description there, horrifically rained out, is correct, as Leichhardt Oval and indeed most of Sydney got battered with the storm to end all storms, seemingly. I was there, and look, had I known how the rest of the evening was going to play out, I probably would have been like all those people that headed for the exits as soon as the game was suspended, rather than spend the next hour at Leichhardt Oval watching the heavens open up. Whilst the venue got blacked out as well. So Sydney FC started this game off incredibly well. Princess Abini found the score sheet. I forget who the other goal scorer was, so my apologies off the top of my head. But we get to half time, and I'm immediately said all I see coming from the left of the press box is just this flash of lighting. So if you saw this game, or you kind of know Leichhardt Oval basically from the main grandstand to the left, there's I guess you'd call like there's a group of trees and sky directly above that, where the trees obviously don't rise, haven't grown further, and just that section of the sky lit up temporarily with a lightning strike, and then sort of lit up again a couple of minutes later, and it was clear that there was a storm coming. It was just a case of when it was going to hit. The Bureau of Meteorology suggested that it was going to be around the 75th minute based on the times of where their map radar is on their app. The 54th minute, lightning got much closer to the vicinity that was within, I think it's 10 kilometres of the venue, which forced play to be suspended. And then less than 5 minutes after the players have left the pitch, just the storm got closer. It hit earlier and just literally got rained out. The venue blacked out probably about 25 minutes later, as did seemingly half of the inner west. It was like people got moved into the function room at Leichhardt Oval. It was a mess. The game got called off. The APL announced that they were going to have a decision made on Thursday. That decision came on Monday morning. So the result, 2-0 at the 54th minute, ended up standing. And Burke, based on the way that you introduced this storyline, I'm guessing you're not a fan of the decision that the APL has made.
How, how did you know? That's so crazy. I just, just, yeah. I don't like it. Sydney were playing very, very well, and Canberra were playing very, very badly. But this game had a lot of time left in it to be played. There's at least half an hour if you're looking at like time added on. There, I just think it was too early to call. And I think if they had have called it at the half, they definitely would have rescheduled it because they would have known that that wasn't like fair, um, in quotation marks for anyone listening on a podcasting app, not watching. Um, but because they got it into the second half, they were like, yeah, this is good enough, whatever. And I do understand that there are other things around rescheduling, being that it's an away game for Canberra, so they would still have to travel again. And we know they're not the most cash flush team in the league, but I still think it should be rescheduled. We've rescheduled games before, it's happened many a time for heat and rain. I don't see why they're suddenly changing their minds about it now. And I don't like it.
So the competition regulations state that any game that goes past the 45-minute mark at halftime essentially can have its result decided if some sort of force majeure event, usually described as an act of God, in this case, whether can, uh, like essentially the game can be called. And in a statement, Canberra United CEO Samantha Farrow said that the club was extremely disappointed in the decision not to reschedule the match. She also said that the club wanted to make it clear to members and supporters they did everything they could to get the remainder of the game rescheduled, including, my apologies, including part of their argument or part of their appeal for rescheduling included that the entire venue lost power, creating a safety and security risk for teams and stakeholders remaining at the venue waiting for the storm to pass. That Canberra have scored 40% of their goals between the 61st and the 90th minutes this season. Sydney FC have conceded 53% of their goals between the 61st minute and full time. And the position of the season indicating that there's plenty of time to rearrange a rescheduled game. In its statement, it also said that the club urged the APL to consider changes to the competition regulations to a more reasonable point in the game, such as 70% of the match completed for when a result should stand, with anything less to be considered either grounds for a reschedule or a nil or draw. I am not unhappy with the decision that the APL have made, and I think it's because I saw that look, Burke. Don't worry, it's got nothing to do with any sort of Sydney FC bias I may or may not have. I think the point that you're looking at is, okay, I know this is sort of getting into the whole, they're 23 till they're 24 vibes, but the game was nearly two-thirds completed at that point. If you break it down into 10% segments, 9 minutes each, the game was 60% completed. It was at the point where Canberra didn't look like they were going to continue, didn't look like they had any way back into the game in the first 9 minutes of the second half. And I know, ifs and buts and whatever. As you've pointed out, the club isn't in the greatest financial resources, nor is the league as a whole. So you're looking at a midweek bus trip back to Sydney. You're looking at players potentially having to take time off work for a rescheduled fixture. You're looking at either playing the game behind closed doors or, having to pay for venue and security and everything for all the fans who do want to turn back up to watch what is essentially 35 minutes plus stoppage time of football. You have to you have to pay for camera operators, broadcast crew, etc. to come back and broadcast the remainder of the game, which doesn't come cheap either. Guessing the APL isn't exactly flush with cash this season either. So, that's another expense there. And the two key points that I picked out of that were when Canberra have scored their goals being 40% after the 61st minute, and Sydney FC conceding that 53% of their goals after the 61st minute. If the crux of your argument is coming down to expected goals, then you've lost me as well. I don't think you can rely on expected goals based on historical data to justify rescheduling the remainder of a game when the protocols were taken in line with competition regulations.
I I get it. I do. But I don't like it. And I don't think it should happen. I still think they should reschedule the game. I'll probably get to the end of the season and Sydney will have snuck into the finals against the wishes of every single person and God herself because of this result. And that is going to annoy me until the end of time itself, which may be quite soon given that storm.
Look, I mean, and that's fair, and you're certainly not the only one who's expressed sentiments like that. And again, I totally understand where you and everyone else is coming from as well. And in another universe, maybe I'm on that train, but in this universe, for however long it continues to exist for, which seemingly could be any day now, as you so succinctly pointed out there, I agree with the decision to award the result to Sydney FC. My big storyline is related to the Matildas coaching search, but I feel like we've discussed that enough already, so I'm going to leave that to a little bit later in the episode. And we're going to bounce into Sydney FC 0, Central Coast Mariners 0. This game could have gone either way. Like, both sides had a case for winning this game. It was bonkers. Bree Edwards showing why she's such a revered young goalkeeper. The Mariners just peppering Sydney FC in the first half with shots. You've got players playing out of position. You've got just everything that seemingly showcases what the dub is, bar the chaotic goals in this game. I mean, honestly, I can't think of a better way to describe it other than peak dub minus the goals, Burke.
Yeah, this game made me feel insane. Uh, I couldn't. I watched most of it, and I just could not believe how many shots both sides were taking, and no one was reaching the back of the net. There were so many of them. With just so many of them.
Yes. I think that is perfect. An outstanding goalkeeping performance from both Bree Edwards and Sarah Langman. Ante Juric said after the match that he was it was pretty I'm trying to think of the word he used off the top of my head, but like he said, he thought that Sydney deserved to win. They're now uh, they're now undefeated to start 2025, 3 draws and 1 win with the Canberra result. Although I think Ante Juric would much prefer it if it was 3 wins and 1 draw. They next face Melbourne Victory on Friday night. I mean, it's a situation where this result and the way the Canberra game ended, with the result going to Sydney, has sort of staved off their must-win situation for another week. But that could very easily change on Friday night, couldn't it, Burke?
Yeah, and no offense, because I don't particularly like either teams that are playing on Friday night. I hope it does change. I hope they're looking straight back down the barrel of, if we were in a better situation, relegation. But we aren't. So I do hope it'll change. Just because, again, I've said this before. I think it's funny. I think it's really funny that the team that won the whole thing last season is now all of a sudden basement dwelling. It's really funny.
Full-time contracts before relegation. But yes, I do get your point. The other side of this match, Central Coast Mariners, as I said already, this game could have gone either way. They dominated the first half. They did drop off a touch in the second half, but still performed incredibly well. The draw got the Mariners back into the top six. Although curiously, when I asked Emily Husband about it after the game, she said that she wasn't really looking at. She said that she wasn't really looking at the table at this point in the season, and we'll play that audio for you now. A tough game. What did you make of the result?
I think we deserved to win. I think in the first half we were by far the better team. I think that's probably the best first half performance we've had all season so far. Didn't quite back it up in the second. A couple of things changed, but I'm really, really proud of the effort from the girls.
It wasn't the 3 points you're hoping for, but it does get you back inside the top six. We're at the halfway point of the season now. Is that sort of where you had the side penciled in, or are you hoping to be a little bit higher up the table?
I'm not even looking at the table right now. It's a halfway point, but there's still so many games to play. And some teams have played most of the top four. Some teams have played most of the bottom four. The table. It's not the true, identification of where everybody is at the moment. So I'm not worried. Bianca Galich has sort of been floating everywhere at the moment, just having an outstanding season. What have you made of her just filling in wherever you've needed her to fill in? Bianca's phenomenal. She's always been so versatile as a player. I've coached her for a long time, and her ability to keep the ball under some extreme, shirt pulling, fouling, absolutely everything. She stands up to it. Never gets given a free kick. Never complains about it. Gets on with it. Doesn't matter where you play her on the pitch. She'll have an unbelievable game. And I'm always proud of B. She's a massive part of our squad.
You mentioned you've coached her for a long time. I see a Sydney University jersey there with her name on it, sort of all the Sydney Uni players getting around signing everything. Does it warm your heart knowing that, fans have followed you through to your journey here with the Mariners?
Yeah, of course. You always hope that you work in football because you want to make an impression and that you want to improve people and you want to make an impression for life. So, of course, these young fans need aspirations, and for them to see the players come through Sydney Uni and come into professional football, for them is something that they can aspire to, and it's realistic for them.
You mentioned you're not even looking at the table at the moment. Is it just taking it game by game as the season goes on?
Yeah, 100%. We'll start to look at it later on, in the season. But at the moment, we'll just take each game as it comes.
I think for me, Burke, listening to Emily Husband there, what was most fascinating about that was this idea of the unevenness of the table and who everyone has played so far in the season, not necessarily creating a true reflection of where the table is actually at. Despite the fact that we've sort of seen some evidence to the contrary to suggest that for a lot of these teams at least, and Western United come to mind, although at last count, as we are recording, as they're currently playing their round 9 fixture against Perth Glory, they were up 2-0 and would jump back into the top 6 if that result holds. It's I don't know, I just thought it was an interesting way to look at it because Melbourne City are clearly the runaway best side in the competition. We've said this as well in the last few weeks, where it's kind of like it's clear there's a top 4, then there's a middle 4, and then there's everyone else. But, one of the premier coaches in the competition doesn't see it that way. So I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, me too. Especially when she said she wasn't looking at the table, at all. Isn't that, again, I think I've said it on this podcast before. I'm not a coach. I don't know what that job entails. I'm guessing a lot, but is it not part of that job to kind of look at the table and be like, yeah, we're here. We should be here. How are we getting there? Is that not the whole job? I was under the impression that it was the whole job. But I guess I'm wrong. I would trust Emily Husband with my life. So if she doesn't want to look at the table, she doesn't have to look at the table. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting to hear from a head coach that they don't care about the table right now. Because we are halfway through the season, I think. Roughly.
Yeah, no,
close enough to.
We are basically at the halfway point. I mean, look, Em Husband could have been lying through her teeth. She doesn't strike me as the sort of coach to do that sort of thing. But, coaches lying to the media? Who'd have thought?
I've never heard that before.
Yeah,
they wouldn't do that.
What? Not at all.
You think someone would just go into a press conference and the lie, it wouldn't. It wouldn't do that.
Um,
I've never
the
witnessed
other
that before.
thing, the other thing that was in there of note that I thought was, I did ask her about, her time at Sydney United and the fact that the fans have sort of followed her through, and the whole idea of leaving an impression, and that's one of the reasons why you coach. That we hear a lot of different reasons why people coach, but that's one I haven't actually heard before, is wanting to leave an impression on the next generation.
I think I think the reason that we haven't heard it said so much is because it's always been implied. Like it's the idea that everyone kind of knows that you're doing it to leave a legacy or whatever. But you're right, it's very interesting to actually hear a coach say it. Like, yes, I am doing this for the legacy that is going to be created. And I think that's really cool of her to like outwardly say that. Like, yes, I'm looking forward to seeing the fruits of my labor, even if they arrive in 10 years' time. I think it's cool.
And hopefully we still have Emily Husband tearing up the A League from a coaching perspective in that time, but also if she gets scouted to go overseas, it would be a just reward for her efforts as well. Who knows? We might have a proper league by then in the A League women competition. Who knows? That's one can dream, right? But we'll move back to the top four now, and we'll go to Sunday night. Adelaide 3, Brisbane 2. In front of a record standalone crowd for Brisbane Roar, women of 3,712, and this comes off the back of their nearly 3,000 a couple of weeks ago in that midweek clash against Melbourne Victory. The people love Brisbane. The games are being put on at good times at an easily accessible venue. Who'd have thought that was the key to drawing a crowd, is good football, an easily accessible venue at good times, Burke?
It's just crazy. It's just crazy when you do the most blatantly obvious things, they have really good outcomes. The other thing that Brisbane have been doing that I didn't know about until I heard it from Magella Card on the Beyond 90 podcast that I'm also on, who is part of the Raw Corps, Brisbane have been selling the women's kit from like the jump at the ground every single week, which is really cool. They've been making money off of the women's team because, again, who would have thought? Fans want to buy things, even when it's women. It's groundbreaking stuff, apparently, somehow. But yeah, no, I think it's really awesome that they're getting those huge crowds, and I hope that they continue to do that and that they get even bigger and bigger and bigger. It's so good.
Now, if only the venue had the facilities to match. Queensland government, looking at you here. Just put money into Perry Park. That's all we ask. But on the field, we'll start with Adelaide first. I don't know if there were any doubts as to whether or not they were a finals contender, but I think they put those doubts to bed here. Claudia Jenkins was fantastic. Erin Healy comes back into the side after an injury, scores a goal. Chelsea Dorber with a brace. No Fiona Wirtz, who was omitted from the matchday squad after being available for selection earlier in the week per the Adelaide United website. Adrian Stenter also said that Isabel Hodson isn't too far away from returning, and Dylan Holmes isn't too far behind her. So a side that didn't have Fiona Wirtz, Izzy Hodson, and Dylan Holmes in it went and beat one of the most exciting sides in the competition this season away from home. And honestly, the fact that they could get even better and they already look fantastic is a very scary thought for the rest of the competition, isn't it, Burke?
Yeah, I mean, all I'm hearing is no Wirtz, no Wirtrees. Is that where I'm going with it? That's where it's going. Yeah, but it is a bit scary that they can just keep pulling all of these like incredible players out from the back rooms once they're ready to run. Um, yeah, they looked really good. They looked really, really good, and I think they've kind of been a bit of an unsung hero, I guess, because they've been very quiet and unassuming, I feel, over the last 11 weeks. But I think it's really great that they're coming through so solidly and, picking up these 3 points against Brisbane, who have been a really fantastic side this season.
Yeah, and on the Brisbane side of things, so Alicia Woods scored a banger to level the scoreline just before half time. They went down 2-1, conceded a third, but still looked to very much be in the contest. Despite that, which should give all of those 3,712 people reason to come back next week, and hopefully add a few more. Oh, well, actually, not next week. They're in Perth next week, but next time they have a home game. I look at this side, and the concerning point for me in this game was Popadanova going down with an injury. But I think you could also make the argument that when she was out with the hamstring injury, the Royal looked to be a better side without having to force her in the front line, because she's been Bulgarian Player of the Year for like the last 6 years or whatever it was, and was a very heralded signing, if I remember how to English, as she came into the competition, and yet her skill set also seems to be limited to that striker, centre forward sort of role. Whereas, we see a lot of other forwards that have come through the dub over the years can move out onto the wing, can sort of drop back into attacking midfield. But with Popadanova, it very much seems like she's a one-position player, and you almost, when she's fit, she's too talented to leave out of the side, but you're also forcing her into a position that disrupts the rest of the lineup and what Alex Smith is trying to do. And so, depending on what sort of the update is or the timeline, whether it was just a knock or whether there's an extended stint on the sidelines for the Bulgarian, I think the Raw might be better off without her, and sort of have her coming off the bench as a super sub to take advantage of tired players late in games where they can sort of shift the formation or approach mid-game.
Yeah, I have to say I agree with all of that. They Something about them looks sharper without Papadanova, which isn't to, begrudge her skills, because she's clearly a very talented player. But it just looks like the formation and the way that Brisbane play their best doesn't correlate, or, doesn't work the best with Papadanova's skill set. And I don't think there's really much you can do about that. But I do think utilising her as a super sub would be a really good idea.
Yeah. We will head now to Wellington, where it was 3-2 for the Phoenix. A 98th minute Olympico winner for Mania Elliott. Gave Wellington the victory here. Newcastle led 2-0 at one point, and as we said back in the as we said earlier, if there was a case for restarting the Sydney-Canberra game, this is probably it, because Wellington did all their damage in the second half and managed to walk away with the 3 points at home, as it's yet another loss for the Jets, Burke. And I know you can't necessarily bring it down to one player, but is it any sort of coincidence that Krasiniak is back between the sticks and they lost?
Uh, I'm not gonna weigh in on that one either way. People can make up their own minds. I All I can say is that the Jets threw this away. Absolutely threw it away. You finish half time at 2-0 up. It was Sheridan Gallagher that scored both the goals as well. She's done all that for you, and then you say, defending? Had enough of her today. Not doing that anymore. That props to Wellington for just absolutely clawing their way to that win, because I was when I saw they were drawing, I was like, wow, good for them. And then when I saw that they won, that that's unreal. It was a great ball as well, that final kick of the game. So you have to give them credit for it. But God, Newcastle, that's that's not even like 3 points lost. That's 3 points handed over.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
not
it
good.
wasn't pretty. I know we sort of just rediscussed the idea just a few minutes ago of this, splitting the table into thirds, top four, middle third, bottom third. Wellington sit just 2 points outside of the top four in fifth place. Western United, again, pending their result, could jump back into the six tonight, which would push both the Mariners and Canberra out of the six. And at that point, between third on the table and eighth on the table, you'd have a grand total of, let me do some quick maths here, 5 points separating those sides. Do we need to maybe look at this as, I guess, sort of like a top eight and then the rest? Or could we, or is that too much of a stretch?
I think that's too much of a stretch. Like, then we might as well just be calling it a top 10. And then we're just calling it a top 12. And then there's the whole table. Like, we do need to have some boundaries.
No,
Some.
no, that's fair. I just trying to give Wellington fans a little bit of hope, but I mean, look, the reality is they're still well inside the top six. They could be in the top four by the end of the weekend. Who knows how things are going to turn out? So it's for a side that had not made the finals in its preceding 3 years in the competition, had literally only kept its first coach for consecutive seasons this year, lost so much talent in the off season, led by Mariana Speckmeyer departing to league leaders Melbourne City. Paul Temple still identified finals as the goal for this side, and so far they're up to expectations, taking advantage of ultimately some poor seasons by sides that made the finals last year, Burke.
Yeah, I think Wellington, I think it's really, I think they're really an exciting team because they can turn it on. And we've literally just seen them absolutely turn it on. And I do want them to make finals. I really do. I think it'd be really exciting for the club considering everything that they've gone through. So,
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Uh, Melbourne City won, Western United won. This was, as I said, a game in which Melbourne City remained undefeated, top of the table, but still couldn't find a way to beat Western United. Carly Johnson's goal in the 45th minute was cancelled out by a Holly McNamara goal in the 83rd minute. Burke, did it cross the line?
look, like I said to you before we started recording, I didn't actually get to see this game because I was at a birthday event where I found a little French bulldog at the venue, which was great, 4-month-old puppy. But I didn't get to watch the game, so I don't know, and I will refrain from commenting, and I will leave it there. The Holy Mac goal, that slapped.
No, that is fair. Say her name, and she appears coming off the bench once again, and Holly Mack saved the day for Melbourne City. Look, I don't think the ball crossed the line, but I'm going to trust that the referees had a much better angle than I did, given they were at the ground, and we know the restrictions, for lack of a better term, with A-League women broadcasts. Maybe one day we'll have more and better camera angles. One day. But for now, look, goal stands. I'm going to default to the referees that they made the right decision, given how hard camera angles can be to tell what actually happened. Canberra won, Western Sydney Wanderers nil. Canberra bounced back from their midweek defeat to Sydney FC, although they didn't know at the time it was going to be a midweek defeat, to win against the other side from Sydney in the Wanderers, Burke. And yes, they got 3 points, but you could probably call this a net negative. Michelle Heyman leaves in the warm-up. We believe it was an injury, but I haven't seen any confirmation on that beyond what Taryn Hetto said on commentary. Beth Gordon rolled her ankle in the 13th minute and then went off 20 minutes later after trying to play through it. Given she's only just come back from a very lengthy injury stint herself, and you can see that by the way that her knee is strapped when she takes the field each game, that maybe playing on wasn't the smartest decision to make there. And as already said, they find out that, they did lose to Sydney FC and that result will stand. So 3 points, yes, but overall a very bad weekend for Canberra.
Yeah, I don't like it. I'm very much not a fan of players. Okay, it's very hard to word this in a way that makes sense and doesn't make it seem like I'm infantilizing the players. But I'm not a fan of players forcing themselves to play through injury. And I understand that there are so many circumstances that influence their decisions, and obviously they know their body best. I'm not in their body, I'm in mine, usually behind a screen. What do I know? But I don't, I never think it's worth it. I just remember years and years ago watching, I think it was the Big Blue in Melbourne at Amy Park years ago, Sydney versus Victory. Amy Harrison took a knock, went down, and I watched the physio wrap up her ribs and then send her back onto the pitch where she almost immediately afterwards did her ACL. And I always think of that when I see players take a really huge hit and then just keep going even though you can see they're in distress. And then they get taken off later. I'm like, that could have ended so badly. And it might still, because you don't know what extra damage you end up doing to yourself by persevering, and you don't know what kind of situation. Obviously, the example I give with Amy Harrison was more like a freak accident, because you wouldn't expect that to happen. But still, I don't like it. I hate it. I understand that the players have to make their own decisions for themselves, but it makes me very nervous. We'll go with nervous. Seeing that happen. So, yeah, I'm glad that Michelle Heyman pulled up and out and didn't try to persevere. I don't like that Gordon continued for 20 minutes when maybe she shouldn't have. I do understand that players feel like they have, or, know that they have an obligation to their teammates and to their supporters and to their coach, but your body kind of is your, job. So it's really for the best, I guess, that you look after it. I don't know. This is a very long-winded tangent for me to just say, I don't like it when people get injured. It makes me sad. But my point stands. I do hate it, and I want it to stop.
Your point absolutely does stand, and I do agree with it completely. Without trying to send us on another tangent, but I feel it's a discussion that has to be had. The current CBA ends after the 2025-26 season. For those who don't know, the collective bargaining agreement dictates a lot of things like player salary, the number of players who are allowed to be on squads and all that sort of thing. And in the A-League men, I believe it's actually I have a team sheet right here in front of me, so I can tell you. There's 7 spaces on the bench, 6 outfield players, and a goalkeeper. In the A-League women, it's 5 spots on the bench, 4 outfield players, and a goalkeeper. And you're allowed to make up to 5 substitutions in a game across 3 windows, not including the halftime break. So essentially, an A-League women's side can never use all of their allotted substitutions unless they choose to substitute their goalkeeper. As part of the CBA renegotiations, sure, I know this is something that doesn't happen all the time, but, you've got player injuries who could essentially be letting their squad down. and they use that term very, very loosely here by coming off too early. If because we see players play through cramp all the time, and sometimes you roll your ankle, you run around on it for a couple of minutes, and you're fine. But surely this could be the the turning point where, okay, if we're serious about player welfare, if we're serious about, equality and all these things, that we have to look at extending the bench sizes, Burke.
Yeah, I think that's the baseline. And I think it really does need to be a real discussion because I know lots of players will talk about things like the heat and how that's a real player safety issue, and it is. But so is this. And if anything, this might be. No, they're probably on par. But it's still a huge issue that I really don't want to see anymore. No more.
I mean, you also have to wonder if this happens in, say, the 70th minute. Does Gordon continue, or does she come off? Because that would be around the time you would start making your substitutions anyway. So I think extended benches are definitely worth a discussion at some point. That being said, we also do look at the A-League women and we see a number of coaches who don't necessarily use all four of their outfield players in substitutions anyway. They still only use the three at different points, which is what it used to be before COVID. So it's one of those things that I guess does vary so much from team to team. But I think if you were to ask most players and most coaches, I think they'd say yes, for several reasons, and player welfare would be at the top of that list. The other side in this game, the Western Sydney Wanderers, Sophie Harding and Gemma Ferris dropped to the bench. Gemma Ferris responsible for, or partially responsible for, two incidents in the Central Coast Mariners game. The first one resulting in a goal while playing out for the back, and the second one almost resulted in a goal. If you head over to the Roundball Australia website in the coming days, we will have a Talking Tactics piece up, as for the first time our Talking Tactics series extends to the A-League Women competition. I've done a tactical analysis this time around. My first foray into tactical analysis was something I felt comfortable talking about. So head over to the Roundball website to read that when it does come out, or you can head to the Roundball Australia socials, and we'll publish it there for you to head over to the website, looking at playing out from the back and its advantages and disadvantages, and why it didn't work for the Western Sydney Wanderers in that game against the Central Coast Mariners. But yeah, so Gemma Ferris dropped to the bench, Sophie Harding dropped to the bench, and the Wanderers, I don't know, it seems like that 5-1 victory against Western United was a lifetime ago, because it's very much the blip in what has been otherwise a bad season once again for the Wanderers. And to be honest, when I had a look at this game, the only player who stood out for me, and this was despite conceding the own goal, was Sham Karmas, who continues to show once again, as she comes back from suspension, why she has been the player of the season so far for the Wanderers, Burke.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a great sign, honestly, if your goalkeeper is your best player. I think Sienna Sebeska has also looked very good, but not like enough to dethrone Commerce, and I don't think anyone will at this point. Yeah, Western Sydney, they're odd. They're an odd bunch. Don't know what's going on there. I don't know if we ever will know what's going on there. But yeah, I don't. The whole playing out from the back thing is like, if your coach is committed to it, you will live by the playing out of the back, and you will die by the playing out from the back. Melbourne City are also very committed to that, or they have been at points, and I remember speaking to, it would have been Dario at the time, Dario Vidicic, about it, where he was like, this is how we're playing, and we're not going to stop playing like this. So I think that's unfortunately what has happened to the Wanderers, where their coach is like, yeah, we're playing out from the back now, guys. And they've had to do this massive adjustment to playing like that in the middle of the season where they're already having maybe not the best time. And it's not helping them. But, like I said, you will live by the playing out from the back and you will die by the playing out from the back.
Yeah, this was something I very much explored in that talking tactics piece, because Jeff Abrahams is a coach who likes to play out from the back. Case in point, Sydney Olympic, who he coached last season before he took on the role as the Academy Technical Director for the Wanderers women's side. So yeah, be sure to check that one out. Just on Sam Karmas, you mentioned it's probably not a good thing for the goalkeeper to be the best player by quite some margin. This is despite the fact that of the 25 goals the Wanderers have conceded this season, she has conceded 19 of them. Because Keely Segovcic conceded 3 against the Wellington Phoenix when she came on for Karmas and her red card, and then conceded 3 to the Mariners just a few days later. So nearly 20 goals conceded, and she's still the best player in the squad. Oh, that's gotta hurt. That's not good. And it doesn't get easier because they play league leaders Melbourne City on Saturday afternoon.
Good luck and Godspeed. That's all I can say.
Before we move on to the remaining game that we need to discuss, I actually want to insert a new segment here, and it's called the airing of the grievances. So I've very much taken the inspiration for this segment from Seinfeld. So for those who know Seinfeld, there is a very famous episode. It is the Festivus episode, and which takes place on Christmas Eve, the 23rd of December. And one of the things of the Festivus is the airing of the grievances. And for those who have listened to the Round Ball Australia podcast in the past, we used to have a segment called Poletti's Rants, but I feel this doesn't quite move into rant territory enough here. So my airing of the grievances for this week is looking at the schedule of Western Sydney Wanderers versus Melbourne City. That game takes place at 5 p.m. on Saturday afternoon at Wanderers Football Park, which in isolation seems fine. It's very innocuous, except for the fact that just 2.5 hours later at Campbelltown Stadium, it's MacArthur FC versus Melbourne City in the A-League men competition. Why has the schedule been booked in such a way that both teams are playing away on the same weekend in the same state, less than an hour's drive apart, but scheduled in such a way that any fans wishing to travel would have to choose? Because taking the M7, it's a toll road that can be done in 45 minutes going from Wanderers Football Park to Campbelltown Stadium. So travelling fans would have to rent a car. Can't take public transport to make both of these games. So there's another added expense if you wanted to watch both sides. You then still probably have to leave the A-League women's game early if you want to make kickoff and find parking at Campbelltown Stadium, because the car parks in and around the stadium fill up very, very quickly. So you're probably looking at a 10 to 15 minute walk from the stadium by the time you would arrive there, having left Wanderers Football Park. And for me, Burke, this very much flies in the face of the idea that the A-League and most of the clubs in the competition are trying to push the one club mentality, and yet you're making it impossible for your fans to attend both games away from home, where, you know, coming into the start of the season, this could have been very easily identified as okay, this looks like a good away trip for fans who turn up to watch both teams. We can do this. And then the logistics actually make it a near impossibility to happen.
Yeah, I'll believe the one club mentality maybe when hell is frozen over, potentially. I'll think about it. But right now, no, I wouldn't. I'm not doing that. Yeah, see, the thing about this whole situation is you're asking why have they done this? And the answer is that they don't care, which is always the answer. It has been, I feel, the answer since I started watching the A-League Women's, which was then the dub, back in 2015-16. They really don't care. They like to pretend that they do, hence the one club mentality idea, but you very rarely, if ever, actually see that happen, which is how we have now gotten here, where travelling fans cannot go to both games. And the way I see it is majority of them won't go to both games. They'll go to the men's because the women's always secondary. That's why heaps of fans will leave double headers or they'll come late to double headers because nobody believes in the one club mentality. The only people that believe in it are the ones that are deluding themselves into it, and those are all in big head offices that don't see a normal person ever. And now we're here. Thanks, guys.
So I posted about this on social media today when it first caught my attention, and friend of the pod, Lockie France, sort of said that he ran into this situation earlier this year where he was travelling to Parramatta to go watch Western United play at the Western Sydney Stadium, the Western United women, while a bunch of Western United fans were heading to the Sydney Football Stadium to go watch the Western United men play Sydney FC. I believe both those games did kick off at the same time. So again, you've got two teams playing in the same city, same weekend, less than an hour's drive apart, and you've got them kicking off at the same time. Why? Because I'm not going to finish
that
sentence.
You don't
Yeah, that sums it up a lot better than what I would have said. Lest I get this podcast demonetized and I find myself on a very short list of people who get turned away from interviews. But yeah, so that's the first edition here of the airing of the grievances on the Dubcast. And hopefully we don't have to make this a regular segment, much like Poletti's rants. I'd very much love to have this in, sort of like sitting on the stove that like I never have to turn on because we just don't have a need for it.
I mean, I get that, but I do love complaining. So we may have that stove on.
Well, we'll keep it on the back burner for now, just on a very low heat, and turn it up when we need to then. The last game of the round that we need to talk about is Melbourne Victory 1, Perth Glory 0. And just an update, although you'll be well aware of this by the time you listen to this, Western United have just gone 3-0 up over Perth Glory. I want to take a stab and say it was one of the Tarantos that scored based on the way that the broadcast was cutting to both Tarantos at different points after the goal celebration, but I didn't see any graphic on the screen to indicate that that it was one of the Tarantos that scored. But we did get a nice graphic of Gary Holler, so maybe it was an own goal. Who knows? I'm not going to take a guess because I don't want to pull that up in front of me right now. But yeah, so not looking good for the Glory. But for me, besides the Kayla Morrison goal here, which we'll get onto in a moment, what stood out for me most about this game was Alex Chidiac becomes the latest player to join the Dub Centurion Club, Burke.
Yay. Yeah, that slays. Good for Chids. She's been around for a very long time. I remember watching her play for Melbourne City back in that 15-16 season, where she was just a very small Chids in very large shorts. Now she's a slightly larger Chids, but also still in those large shorts. I think she's a great player, and she's so well loved by the fans and the other players alike. Huge congratulations to her on a really big achievement.
Yeah, and that is a list I'm sure we'll see grow in the coming years as, these 22, 23 game seasons become more of a regularity, and, we don't have a player like Cass Davis who's notched up 130 appearances over 12 or 13 years because there just haven't been enough games to sort of fill out that number. But the goal itself, I mean, I saw this goal and I immediately thought of something that you would post in this situation, Burke. Kayla Morrison left all alone at the far post, just allowed to bounce it in, and my immediate thought was, what the hell is a polar bear doing in Arlington, Texas?
I knew you were going to quote that before you even said it. As soon as you said it was something that I would post, I was like, it's a polar bear in Arlington, Texas. And it was. What the hell was she doing there? And what the hell was she doing there unmarked? Is the real question. Perth Glory, what are you doing? The answer? Not well. Or not good. What are you doing? They're not doing good. Oof. It was a great goal, though. It was really well controlled first touch and a great hit. Nothing bad to be said about it. Yeah, Aussie Kayla, you gun.
Yeah, no, I mean, goes in, half volley off the underside of the crossbar and just bounces over the line. I mean, that was very sweetly struck by Kayla Morrison, her second goal of the season. And the result here puts Melbourne Victory into second place on the table. They're now just 2 points behind Melbourne City, who, as we discussed earlier, dropped points. If they beat Sydney FC on Friday, Burke, Victory could find themselves top of the table. And I think that's not something any of us had penciled in at the start of the year, in part because we know Jeff Hopkins' sides usually tend to turn up late and go on their run as the finals are hitting, but also because Melbourne City just keep dropping points at inopportune times.
Yeah, they really love a draw. They don't lose, Melbourne City, but they love a draw, it seems, especially silly ones. Like really silly ones. You find your silliest draw, and Melbourne City is at the scene of the crime. I think it'd be very interesting for Victory to go top of the table. And you're right, I definitely wouldn't have. It's not on my bingo card. But props to anyone who did have it on theirs. Can you tell me the lottery numbers?
I mean, and to be fair, they could also very easily go back into second after Saturday night should they win. So we'll see where the top two finish the weekend on the table. But that is our look at the round 12, which has just recently been completed. The Futsal Matildas qualified for the AFC Women's Futsal Asian Cup. They topped their group, winning 4 from 4 games. I mean, just a dominant performance from start to finish. And, for their first competitive outing as a squad, Burke looked incredibly impressive throughout this qualifying group.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see where they go going forward because obviously they've qualified for the Futsal Cup, Futsal Asian Cup, I should say. But it'll be interesting to see if they keep the same personnel because there are definitely plenty of A-League women's players who are futsal players before they're football players. So whether they'll end up there or not will be interesting because I think one of the reasons for a lot of the selections that were made was that A-League women's players have, contracts that they have to fulfill, so they weren't able to sort of go to these qualifiers. So, yeah, I think it'll be interesting, the future of the futsal Tillies.
Yeah, so we did see that of the A-League women players, Nat Tatham, who's currently in action for Perth Glory, was allowed to attend the training camp or the selection training camp by the club and then immediately jumped back into Glory club commitments on the Friday night in their game against the Wanderers, with that camp being based in Sydney. As Perth Glory have just got one back. How good. So, yay Perth. They can score goals. Who'd have thought? I'm sorry, that sounds really mean towards Perth Glory. I know they're having a good, I know they're not having a great season, but they have shown promises at some points throughout the season. But actually, I think it might have been Tatham who got the last touch on that. No, it was Gabby Holler. My apologies. I just saw Nat Tatham running away in celebration. Where was I? Oh yes, Nat Tatham. So she was allowed by the club to go to this to go to this selection camp in Dural. Obviously, didn't make the squad as it, because it's obviously has a Perth Glory commitment. Whereas I look at other players, and I think looking at Melbourne City, someone like Ariana Pollicina obviously is not going to be available because she'll still have Melbourne City commitments. But then, should Sydney not make finals, and we've established already that how unlikely that is to happen, someone like Tori Tumeth could be available for selection, for example. And I very much said if I was someone coming up against Australia, I don't think I'd want to see Tori Tumeth on the other side. Something that we did forget to discuss during the Sydney Mariners game, as Brooke Nunn found out, being on the very wrong end of a Tori Tumeth throw in, Burke.
That was so deeply funny. And when I saw it, I was like, hang on, I've seen that before, because Katie McCabe did something very, very similar once in an Arsenal game. I know we spoke about it on the Beyond 90 podcast as well. Lots of people in social media spaces were pretty much calling for her head for doing that. And to that, I say, can you guys, just let women have fun? If she wants to throw the ball at someone's head, let her. She can do what she likes. What you really don't want is her throwing a ball at you. I promise Brooke Nunn can take it. You? No.
I mean, she got her yellow card. She had her fun,
Yeah.
and besides, wasn't that a Cyndi Lauper song? Girls just want to have fun. Just let them have fun.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we'll move now to something that is becoming less and less fun. Is the ongoing Matildas coaching search. So we talked last week about Casey Stoney joining Canada and what that meant in terms of the Matildas. So an article appeared in The Australian on Friday afternoon by Jessica Halloran. So what we've learned from this article is that Heather Garriock is the one leading the coaching recruitment process, and that the FA wants someone who can take the Matildas to the next level with the quality of world-class players that they have, and that the coaching search list is down to a 10-person shortlist, which was initially identified as being somewhere in the 50 to 60 range. So they're down to essentially their final 10. For those who don't know, Heather Garriock was part of the last Matildas team to win silverware at the 2010 Women's Asian Cup. Garriock confirmed that former England international and San Diego Wave boss Casey Stoney was not considered for their shortlist, which, if you want to hear our thoughts on that, go back and listen to last week's episode. I can't believe that Stoney was not considered. But Canada's gain is Australia's loss, and yes, Burke, I very much agree with the thumbs down that you've got there. The decision baffles me, but again, go back and listen to last week's episode. I'm not going to rehash that here. We found out that Tom Samani is going to be in charge for the She Believes Cup, so another window with Samani in charge. I'm indifferent about that at this point. It is what it is. We can't do anything about it. An interesting quote: Joe Montemuro would have been a perfect fit, but he's at the biggest club in the world, Lyon, and he's on a 2-year fixed contract, and therefore we've pivoted on what we're doing, is what Garriock said. And yet, Montemuro was available a month before Tony Gustafson departed the role. So, bad foresight by Football Australia, ? I mean, that's fascinating. There, we also... the three of us, you, myself, and Kieran Yap, also identified Leah Blaney. We discussed that news. Quote from Garriock: it's important for Leah to spread her wings and be in an environment where she's going to be based in Europe with arguably the best Asian nations, and for her to be assistant coach is an incredible opportunity. We encouraged her to go and take that opportunity. Whilst we still wanted her in Australia, it was best for her development. So, I mean, no issues there. I think that was sort of something we identified already, that, this was very much Leah Blaney going to continue her development. But then we get to some of the names that were listed in this article that are on Football Australia's shortlist here. So, Ante Juric, currently Sydney FC and Sydney United coach. We've got former Brisbane Royal men's coach Ross Aloisi, Tanya Oxtoby, who is currently coaching Northern Ireland and served as assistant to Emma Hayes at Chelsea during Hayes' time before she took the US women's national team job. So before I move on to the last name that was identified in this article, Burke, I mean, Oxtoby was not someone I had identified, and certainly not someone that I know too much about. I've never really done that deep of a dive into her coaching repertoire and her exploits. But, you know, an assistant to Emma Hayes, I know a lot of people rate her highly. Not only Emma Hayes, but I know people rate Oxtoby highly and what she's doing at Northern Ireland. I mean, she is an Australian. You know, it ticks a lot of boxes as to what we want out of the next Matildas coach, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, but I'm gonna have to say I don't know that much about her, so I can't really make an informed comment. Um, but she would have definitely learnt a lot under Emma Hayes, is what I can say.
I mean, we've seen it work before in the A-League women that if you can't get the coach you want, you get the assistant. And I mean, the example for me that immediately springs to mind is Rado Vidicic departing to coach Melbourne City's men's side in what was ultimately an ill-fated juncture, and you just let Dario Vidicic take the realm. He'd been there as an assistant to his father, and that worked for Melbourne City, and Dario Vidicic went to Brighton. So, you know, it all worked out in the end there. But
We could
the
go
last
really
name,
deep into dub cut, and if it's really not working out, I don't know, are you allowed to do it at like an international level as a player coach? Jess Fishlock did it, dragged Melbourne City to a series of finals.
oh, she did. I forgot about that.
That
That
was crazy. Jess Fishlock,
that
you
was
are, she's dub player of all time, one of
and
at least.
and to link
And
it back
like
to the Matildas discussion, that was because Joe Montemuro went and took the Arsenal job, wasn't it?
it was. Um, yeah, I don't know if you're allowed to do that internationally, but it would be kind of funny. Who would you pick? Like, who out of the Matildas roster would you trust enough to be a player coach?
Oh, that's a good question. I'd want someone who has a very good footballing IQ, and that's not to say that they all don't have a good footballing IQ. But someone who
But
has the
there's,
skill set to
yeah,
be a coach. I mean, if you'd have
unfortunately,
asked me,
it's unfortunate that Polk's retired, right?
that was literally, if you'd have asked me this 12 months ago, I would have said Balkinghorn. Um, oh, that is a tough one. I don't know who on the current squad I'd pick. I mean, for some reason, Tamika Yallop's name is coming to mind
Mm-hmm.
as someone who might fit the role. I mean,
Steph
the only other name.
Catley?
Oh, I mean, yeah, Catley. The only other name I might have suggested would have been Van Egmond, I think, but I
See,
don't know if she has the personality to be a coach.
see, I was thinking that immediately because I always remember it was the most recent random stint that she did at Newcastle where she was there for like 6 games or something, where play had stopped for whatever reason, and Van Egmond is immediately like coaching all of the players around her. And that, yeah, that would work. But I also know that I am a true believer, so me suggesting that would obviously just come off as me being a true believer. But because you said it, it's fine. So,
Loopholes. We absolutely love them here on the Dubcast. The last name that's on this list, which was a very curious one when I saw it in the article, was Serena Weigman, who is under contract with England until 2027. But, you know, Gary Hock said that they wanted to possibly have the discussion with her after the 2025 Euros, which are 5 or 6 months away. I mean, for me, I think she would be a fantastic get, but can you really leave it that late to have discussions And that's just to see if she'd be interested in the job, let alone getting her out of her England contract, getting her to Australia, getting personnel in. And we touched on this last week again with the Stoney discussion, but that's July and the Asian Cup is in February. It's such a finite window that, as great as a coach she would be, I think getting her where the Matildas currently are in the cycle would hurt more than it would benefit the side, even with her advanced skill set as a coach.
Yeah, and I think the only way that we're getting her anytime soon is if England have the most spectacular crash out of the Euros, like in history. Like they would have to crash out like no team has ever crashed out before for her to even be like to even take it seriously, I think. And for for England to want to release her kind of thing. Because I don't know if we can afford her. I don't know how much money Football Australia has or how much money they think they have. I don't know if it's Serena Weichman money. But hey, we'll find out. Maybe they will crash out and England will be like, we're cutting our losses, and we'll be like, we'll take that. Thank you. But you're very right in that it's a very, very tight turnaround if we're waiting until then. Like if we're waiting until then, we should have at least been like slipping notes to her kind of thing. Like we should be sending her like emails being like, hey, Australia here. Have you thought about us before? You should. Did you like it when you came here in 2023? I know the ending was bad, but did you like it here? Like, could you see yourself? Like, we should be sending her frequent emails being like, hey, sup, we're still here. If you ever decide to leave the rain, we're here.
Just show her photos of Bondi Beach, and she can settle there where every other European tourist settles in Sydney's eastern suburbs. Sorry, go on, but
no, I was just going to repeat that the timeline is very, very tight for the Asian Cup. Like we need someone now, which is why I think we're going to be getting one of these other names. And I don't know if I rate Ross Aloisi. I don't know how I feel about that. Has he coached in? I don't know much about him. Has he coached in the women's game before?
I don't believe he has off the top of my head. Like I said, this article did identify, a list of men's and women's coaches. Look, I like Ross Aloisi as a coach. He did good things with a very below average Brisbane Roar side for a few weeks before he went to go join Kevin Muscat in China as an assistant there. But, I mean, so the other two names on this list, Juric and Oxtoby, I mean, Juric...
They're in the women's game, at the very least.
Of those, I would take Tanya Oxtoby just because I think trying to get Ante Juric out of two contracts at the same time is probably a no bueno for Football Australia.
Good luck.
But yeah, so look, that's just 4 names in a potential 10-person list that was identified in this article. So those are the only names mentioned. So who knows who these other 6 names are? If anyone knows, please drop us a DM.
Please,
if anyone wants to slide us some information,
create a burner account.
We're happy to quote anonymous sources.
I'd love to quote an anonymous source. Please, email, DM, send me physical mail. I'm not giving you my address. You have to work that out yourself. But I'd love to know. Telepathically communicate it to me. Send it via smoke signal. Somehow get into my dreams. I don't care.
Carrier pigeon.
Whatever it takes. Please get me the information. I'm not above begging.
So just before we sign off, as we've had another lengthy episode here on the Dubcast, but there's been so much to discuss this week as there have been in recent weeks. Western United 4, Perth Glory 1 is full-time score there. Western United go back inside the top 6 and really, sort of for the second time this season, start to develop a run of results. We discussed this last week where they haven't gotten more than 2 results in a row But they could potentially make it 3 in a row this weekend with a result. So it could be the turning point of their season, perhaps. But that will do for this episode of the Dubcast, part of the Roundball Australia podcast network. Burke, so already, it was a lengthy one, but, so much to discuss.
As always, thank you for having me and for tolerating my incessant ranting about things. But if someone does have a carrier pigeon with the list of names, I will take it. I'm so serious.
Yes. Yes, no, I will absolutely echo those sentiments. Let's bring back the 1800s. It's carrier pigeon or nothing at all. But yeah, so that will do for this episode of the Dubcast. Thank you once again to Burke. My name is Poletti, signing off. We'll be back next week on Wednesday, and maybe next week we'll be able to keep it under an hour. Who knows? If you're listening to this on Apple or Spotify, give us a 5-star rating. All that fun stuff. If you're watching on YouTube, like, subscribe, all that stuff that helps us keep delivering this content each and every week. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.